Discursive identity. So if you were to give like an elevator speech about what it is and why it's important for educators to understand, how would you describe discursive identity?
So discursive identity is essentially the idea that we have an identity that we communicate through the words we use, to the pace of our conversation, to the tone and intonation. So if I'm angry, I'm going to speak to you in a mode that lets you know I'm angry. It has purpose, it has intention. And so if that is the case, then the question is, how does the way that we use language mark us as a particular type of person? And then you do the inverse. How do we interpret who we believe a person is by how they communicate? So if a person is a really big person, like 6'8", and you have an imagined image of what they should sound like. So if this person is male and 6'8", and they speak with a high-pitched voice, it is almost shocking. It's discomforting in some ways because the image doesn't match. So the reality that we live in is we make snap judgments about people immediately based on the way that they communicate. So when I grew up in an urban context, and the people in my community, we used to end with though a lot and start with though. We say, hey, what time are we going to the store though? Right. And it was a marker of just neighborhood and culture. Right. And so you might assume I didn't know how to speak. The point is, it just reflected my neighborhood, my context, the people who I was around, and it was appropriate. So the big barrier is that we have an imagined discursive identity or language identity that we put on kids that doesn't really match. So here's some interesting studies. For example, there was a study about physicians, that people in the South did not want their physicians to have thick Southern accents. And I could not get my head around it. Like, why would you not want a person who lives in the South to speak with a Southern accent? And it was about stereotypes around brilliance and Southern accents. And so the question is, why wouldn't a person who had a thick Southern accent be brilliant, right? It is the assumptions about what we think brilliant sounds like. So if that's the case, then is the opposite true? Is a thick Northern accent brilliance? So does a Boston accent cue brilliance? Of course not. We have to really start to question the mode of communication reflects our perception of people. And that's super important for science classrooms or teaching in general, because when you go to a classroom, you don't know the idea, and the teacher's asking you to communicate what you think. So their perception of who you are and how you communicate, I think, serves as a burden. And we've been studying that for quite some time. So that's the long version of discursive identity and how it matters.
I like it. One of the things that I like about discourse and discourse analysis in particular is there are many types of discourse that you can look at. So like one of my professors, James Paul G., he talked about small d versus big D discourse, and how like the small d discourse was like the things that you say, the things that you're directly communicating through like speech or text and whatnot. But then the big D discourse is like other things. So like right now, I'm wearing a t-shirt that's for a drum corps that I happen to like. I'm also wearing a necklace that's a kanji symbol. So like all these things are representing different identities and communicating different things. And even within discourse analysis, like there's different approaches. Like there's discursive psychology, there's media discourse analysis. There's like all these ways of looking at like body language and like clothing and things that all communicate different stuff. So even just starting and ending sentences with the word though, like that's like one thing of doing it. But then if you also are wearing certain types of attire, that will match starting and ending with though. And if you wear different types of attire, that's going to be like, whoa, wait, that doesn't really work. They're incongruent with each other. It's fascinating to look at all the different ways that people are communicating identities through language and through just other things outside of language.
See, now you're speaking my language. Jim G is the guru of this.
Yeah.
Everything I learned came from Jim G's work, brilliance on top of brilliance. So one of the things we talked about in our classes is that if that's the case, if everyone speaks in ways that are reflective of American culture, why do we have accents? Why would we in California speak different than people from New York or people from Texas or Alabama? And John Ball has this work. He's a retired professor from Stanford, and his work talks about variation and the power of it. So, for example, I can say hello. I can say hello. I can say hello. Same words, different message. And I can send you multiple variations of the same message, but I always have the power to determine how I want to say it and what's the message that I want to send. So people speak with regional accents because I love sounding like my grandparents and my uncles and my cousins and friends. Is being from Oakland, I'm an Oakland, California native. If a person says it's hella hot outside, I'm comforted. I know you are my kind of human being. Intentionally chose to say hella because it's a marker of community, culture, and context, right? And so if we understand that this is how language works, and the linguists know this for sure, then Why do we just walk into classrooms and play these ridiculous language games with kids, right? We walk into the classroom. They're not supposed to know the one thing that we're learning. Let's say it's chemistry. Walk to a chemistry class, and the teacher asks you a bunch of questions about chemistry. And the one thing you don't know is chemistry, because that's why you're in the chemistry class. And then the teacher uses lots of chemistry words to teach you about chemistry as if the words are just inherently understood. And so I think part of what is really perplexing about how language works in classrooms is that we just accept it as a norm without creating intentional norms. Like, why do you have to raise your hand to participate in a conversation in a classroom? It would be absolutely ridiculous to do that at a coffee shop with a group of us sitting around talking. No one raises their hand. So do you need to raise your hand in order to have a healthy conversation? And if you didn't, what would be the benefit of a freelance conversation where everyone has equal power in contributing?
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 53, which is titled Situated Language and Learning with Bryan Brown. You can listen to this full episode as well as hundreds more by searching for the CSK8 podcast or by going to jaredoleary.com.